Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. The death toll from the Hamas-Israel conflict continues to ride with devastation on both sides of the battle. A Vancouver man who was killed in Israel is remembered as a leader, and a woman in the city of Ramallah speaks about the losses in Gaza. After 12:30, we'll talk to a registered dietitian to see what you need to know when reading food labels and what you should avoid. And we'll take a look at some of your submissions for our Colors of the Fall photo contest. I'm Amy Bell, in for Michelle Eliot, and this is BC Today. Thank you for joining us on CBC Radio 1 and live streaming on CBC Gem, cbc.ca/BC, and on the CBC Vancouver YouTube page. We begin today just east of Ashdod and the funeral for a Vancouver man killed by Hamas. Mourners gathered to remember Ben Mizrachi, who was killed when gunmen attacked at a music festival in Israel last weekend. He's being remembered as a leader who loved to make others laugh. Aviv Troy attended the service. He told the CBC's Adrian Arsenal that Ben Mizrachi dedicated himself to helping others.
So I'm sure you're aware of what happened Saturday. There were thousands of young people just going to have a good time at a party out on the Gaza border, and who would have thought that the disaster would have struck there. And many people just started to run for their lives, literally. Literally, I have friends who survived, and they said it was horrific, and they were looking left and right, and people were getting cut down, and Ben started to run, and like Ben, he turned around and he said, "I'm not going anywhere." He was trained as a combat medic in his army service, which he did for 2 years and 8 months as a paratrooper. And it's not something that goes after 2 years and 8 months. I mean, he kept it up, and he turned around and he said, "I'm going back in." He had a little first aid kit with him, and he went to save. And his mother just said he was a fighter without a weapon, but he had heart. He had the knowledge, he knew what he was doing, and I'm sure he saved lives. He just put himself in front for other people, and knowing Ben, known him for 5 years, I mean, he lived that. He lived that, and it's not surprising to me that's what he did with his last breath.
Aviv Troy, a friend of Ben Mizrachi, speaking to the CBC at the funeral service near Ashdod. Meanwhile, Ottawa is working to get Canadians out of Israel by air later this week. Israel's military continues to amass heavy weapons on the border with Gaza and is signaling it will soon shift from retaliatory airstrikes on Gaza to a ground offensive. We know that more than 1,200 Israelis have been killed, including more than 150 soldiers. While in Gaza, the health ministry says more than 1,000 people have been killed and more than 5,000 have been injured by Israeli airstrikes. And the UN says more than 180,000 people have been left homeless with no opportunity to leave the region. Oxfam policy lead Bushra Khalidi is in Ramallah in the central West Bank. She told Stephen Quinn on CBC's The Early Edition that the situation in Gaza is devastating.
The decision by Israel to collectively punish an entire population of 2.2 million people, almost of which half are children, is cruel. The power plant in Gaza was shut down at 2 p.m. today. Tonight, Gaza will be in the dark, isolated from the world. There's no more electricity. There's no water. There's no internet. There's no phone lines. There's very little food. Medical supplies are dwindling. Shifa Hospital just announced that if there's no replenishment of their fuel supplies, they will have to shut down their operations between 3 and 4 days. Our colleagues said that if this happens, we could call this a mass cemetery. I've been on calls to colleagues and also my in-laws that live in Gaza, desperately waiting for the 2 blue ticks to appear on WhatsApp, meaning their phones are on and they have a little internet, and assuming they're alive. Everybody I've spoken to has said that this time around the bombardments have been near constant. It has been the bloodiest and most destructive escalation of violence they've lived through. And remember, this is the 6th escalation in the last 10 years while living under a brutal 16-year-old blockade. And my nephews, all they've known in their young lives is war. And now it's 10 times more intense. And the families sleep together because they have nowhere else to go. Because if they die together. They can't even go to the street because of the level of destruction and damage. So even if they wanted to relocate to friends or nearby family, they can't even walk out of their own doors. Many of our family friends have lost their homes. So many we have stopped counting. Entire neighborhoods have been wiped out. There's no shelter in Gaza. Even the designated ones are not fit or equipped to shelter people. Raw sewage is being dumped into the sea. People are rationing water. Humanitarian workers have been killed. UN workers, 9 UN workers have just been struck by Israeli airstrikes. Humanitarian workers are also sleeping on the streets.
Is there anywhere for people to go?
No. I mean, this is what the message that we were just on a call with a few colleagues that were able to connect to internet that have, generators and are able to have a little electricity and have some fuel supplies left. I mean, they said, please tell the world that we have nowhere to go. We have nowhere to relocate to. There's nowhere safe in Gaza. And I'm sorry, I'm very emotional. It has been a very, very tough day today.
Oxfam policy lead Bushra Khalidi speaking today from Ramallah. Much more on this story today on CBC Radio 1, on cbc.ca/news, and on your CBC News app. A caretaker's provision in BC's Resident Tenancy Act allows a landlord to serve a tenant with a notice of eviction if the unit is earmarked for a building caretaker. But are some landlords and management companies using this as a way to evict tenants and raise the rent? I'm joined now by Kiran Singh, who spoke with two tenants who say their cases illustrate why laws to protect tenants needs to be strengthened. Hi, Karen.
Hi, Amy.
So how exactly does the caretaker's provision work?
So it's just as simple as you explained in the intro. There is a number of ways a landlord can evict tenants or ask the tenants to move out if the landlord wants to transform that property into a different use, or if the landlord wants to move in a person who's related to them, a family member. But there is also this provision that if the landlord wants to move in a caretaker for the building, somebody who will look after the building and live in the building and respond to calls from the tenants, then the tenant will have to move out. However, it becomes an issue when it becomes problematic when a landlord is telling this to multiple tenants in one single building,
Right.
that we're going to have to move you out to move in a caretaker.
And one company has alleged to have done this, Plan A. How have they responded?
So they have responded. Before I get to that, perhaps I should tell you the tenants who I talked with.
Yes, of course.
One of the tenants, Mauricio Carvello, who I talked with, he's been given an eviction notice that says you need to move out so we can move in a caretaker. When I talked to him, he said he wouldn't have had an issue with the eviction notice if his former neighbor wasn't moved out after being told the same. Reina Goto was
Right.
the other tenant who Plan A Real Estate moved out after telling her that, hey, we're going to move in a caretaker. So either you can wait for our eviction notice or you can mutually agree to end your tenancy, which she did. And after that, I reached out to Plan A after hearing Mauricio's and Reina's story. And Plan A says they haven't done anything wrong. Reina mutually agreed to end her tenancy, but they couldn't find a caretaker in time. So they had to put her apartment up on the market. But the caveat here is her apartment was put on back on the market for over $1,000 more from what she was paying. When I asked Anup Majitia, he's the director of Plan A Real Estate. He said that he was just doing his fiduciary duty to the landlord. The landlord, in fact, is actually Majitia's wife in this case. So he said that now that they've found a caretaker, so they've finally, and they don't have any other apartment where they can move in a caretaker, so they're evicting Mauricio.
And as you said, the new rental rate will be at a much higher rate than previously was being used.
Absolutely. That's the thing. The BC government only allows for the rent to be raised by a certain percentage. And in this coming year, it's going to be 3.5%. However, if it's a new tenancy, the landlord can raise the rent to market price, to whatever they really want.
Right. How common is this practice with the caretaker's provision? How common is that being used to remove tenants? Is this something relatively new, or is this a long-standing practice?
So this has been a provision that's been in the Residential Tenancy Act for years and years now. However, when I talked with the experts on this matter, they mentioned that they saw a rise in this happening after 2021. So what happened in 2021 was when the BC government really broke down on the renovictions, because during that time people were renovicting people. People were like, we're gonna paint your apartment, so you gotta move out.
Common, yes.
Exactly. So those rules changed, but then the experts I talked with mentioned that once there was a moratorium, or perhaps it was harder to move a tenant under the renovictions, people started looking at other avenues to move out tenants, and caretaker provision is one of those.
And is there anything that a tenant themselves can do to protect themselves from this situation?
So, for example, in Reina's case, she signed a mutual agreement. She agreed to end her tenancy. And when I asked her if she had gone to RTB to get help, she said she did. But they said, since you agreed to end this tenancy, we can't really do much. And the law says if you agree to end a tenancy, there really isn't a lot that can be done. So what tenants can do is really look into this. And if somebody's pressuring to do a mutual agreement, the law says that you're not obligated to sign a mutual agreement. So what you can really do is wait for that eviction notice and seek legal help.
Are there any plans to change this provision? They changed the renoviction laws, so now that this is becoming more common, is this something they perhaps might look at changing? Is there any indication of that?
I reached out to the Ministry of BC Housing with the same questions, and what I was told that the ministry acknowledged that they know that evictions under false pretense continue to happen. And I was told that, yes, there will be some changes coming, but I wasn't told what the changes are going to be, and that they will be announced at a later date.
All right. I'm sure we will speak to you again about this. Kiran Singh is a journalist here with CBC Vancouver and a story producer on the coast. And Kiran, you'll actually be joining Gloria Makarenko this afternoon to talk even more about this story, correct?
Absolutely. We're going to have all the details.
Excellent. Hopefully everybody tunes in and we'll find out more. Thank you, Kiran.
Thanks, Amy.
All right, Kiran Singh, a story producer here in Vancouver. You can also read the detailed story on our website, cbc.ca/BC. And now for more on this story, we're joined by Robert Patterson. He's a lawyer and a tenant advocate at the Tenant Resource and Advisory Center. Hi, Robert. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
So you've been listening to that report from our Kiran Singh. What do you make of what you've heard?
Yeah, I think Kieran touched on a lot of really important points. One really big one, right, is we talked a lot about maybe circa 2018, 2019, the waves of renovictions that were mass displacing people across Vancouver. And since 2021, when the rules in the Residential Tenancy Act were changed to make those, building-wide renovictions more challenging for landlords to do in bad faith, we've seen that sort of same desire, the same profit motive to evict people, to raise rents, has been diffused into different avenues for getting rid of tenants. So primarily that has been through 2-month notices, landlord use of property notices. So a landlord claims that themselves or a close family member are going to move in. And I think more recently, there's started to also be an uptick in these caretaker evictions. And caretaker evictions are a bit more challenging because, if a landlord is trying, you can't empty a building with a caretaker eviction. You can sort
Right.
of pick off individual tenants. But I think the profit motive is just so high, especially for tenants who are paying lower rent. But those tenants who are paying lower rent also tend to be the most vulnerable.
Mhm.
They are usually seniors. They're usually on fixed incomes or disability, low incomes, on assistance, income assistance. So it really poses a grave threat to their tenancies. As well, I think there is a bit of a, because these sort of cases haven't been that prevalent in the past and the provision hasn't really been tested that much, it's not really clear what a landlord really has to show other than to say, I'm picking a unit, I want to move a caretaker in. There's sort of an implied right to have a caretaker in a building, even when it may or may not make sense.
Mhm.
And then to be able to serve this notice. And one of the big problems with the way these evictions in general are handled, first off, we put tenants in charge of their own defense. A tenant gets a piece of paper from the landlord. The landlord doesn't have to file anything with anyone, pay any fee. They just serve a piece of paper, and now the tenant's the one who has to pay money or prove that they're low income to begin the legal process to defend their tenancy. That needs to be the other way around. Landlords need to be the one who engage the legal process first and make sure that tenants get full notice and the full right to defend themselves. Second, I think the way these kind of evictions, all landlord use evictions, are being dealt with when they actually go before an arbitrator is not particularly consistent.
Right.
So even in cases where a landlord, as we've seen, I'll take a sort of general example that has come up in a number of different cases. A landlord buys an older, very small apartment building, maybe 4 units, and the landlord themselves are significantly wealthy. But they claim that themselves, their children, their parents are all going to move into these small 1-2 bedroom, 50-year-old apartment units from their, multi-million dollar mansions. And when those tenants dispute those notices, well, first off, so many tenants are scared of disputing because they don't know if they're going to win, and if they
Right.
lose, our current rules say they may have to move out in as little as 48 hours after a hearing,
Right.
which is a frankly absurd outcome that just drives people into homelessness. But even when all those tenants dispute those kind of notices, we still see it's not consistent across the board. Maybe the landlord will win 1 or 2 of those hearings, even if they lose a couple others. And so through this sort of war of attrition, or just serving notice after notice after notice, we allow landlords to drive people out of their homes, pushing them out of affordability back into the market where rates are just being jacked up to as much as people can bear, or maybe more than that now. And those units are now flipped back onto the market with minimal, if any, repairs at double,
higher
triple their
prices.
price.
Robert, I'd like to just pause so we can bring in some audience members. And of course, we do want to hear from you. What is your experience with evictions in BC? Do tenants need more protections? Call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, star or pound 690 on your cell phone. You can email bctoday@cbc.ca. And we actually have a caller on the line, Sheena in Victoria. Hi, Sheena. Thanks for joining us.
Hi.
What is your experience with rentals and tenants?
Well, first of all, the rents are so ridiculous. But the particular building I'm in right now was a seniors building, which was lovely.
Mm-hmm.
And the new owners said, "Oh no, we're going to change it to all ages because we're trying to follow the policy of making more rental available." But this didn't make more rental available. It's just that young people move more often.
Right.
So I've started a petition to change the rental laws because safe, secure, affordable housing is a human right. So I don't want any more increases between tenants. That's the big one. That's the one that encourages landlords to move people out.
Mm.
And also 2 months' notice. 1 month is ridiculous, and no other province does that. May I say the address of the petition?
Actually, Sheena, we are going to have to jump off the line. The connection is just so bad, so I don't want to lose you. But you did get your point across, and I'll put that to Robert. She says not having any rent increases between tenants, giving longer than notice. But do you think some landlords might actually just take the units off the market if these kind of restrictions were implemented, actually leading to less housing in the market?
That's certainly what the landlord lobbyists said in 2018 when the province did their task force. But I think that's the kind of threat that policymakers have to be very careful in analyzing, because I mean, these buildings are out there, they're in the world, and if the only threat is we're going to effectively take our ball home if you don't play by our rules and we'll wrap up the game, does that actually make sense? Does that actually something that landlords can do? Because it is a threat that is trotted out relatively consistently across sort of landlord-tenant disputes, both in BC and across this country and even the world.
Okay.
So you look, for example, in Ontario, around their pet provisions. The government in the last decade, I'm going to say, removed the landlord's ability to restrict pets. So landlords now have to allow pets under certain reasonable circumstances. When that was being proposed, landlords said, well, if you're going to force me to have pets in my unit, I'm just going to take it off the market. The rules were changed. The market is still, I'm not sure that led to any significant departure of units from the market. At the end of the day, landlords are in this to make money. They're not going to keep a unit empty if they can rent it out for more money. At the same time, they'll certainly threaten to do that if they think it'll protect their bottom line. Because at the end of the day, it's an investment procedure for a landlord, whether it's a real estate investment trust or another significant financial institution, or just a family who happens to own multiple multi-million-dollar apartment buildings.
All right. We do have another caller as well, Ellen in Parksville. Hi, Ellen. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. Thank you for taking my call. I'm in the exact same situation. Our apartment building was sold a couple of years ago, and there's been no maintenance done since. The lights are out. There's all kinds. It's just awful.
Right.
But my neighbor down the hall just got evicted so a caretaker could move in. Now that could have easily been me because I pay cheap rent, and I've got a good apartment. And I feel like I'm walking around with a target on my back. But my question is that if after the caretaker moves in, if we can prove that no caretaking has been done, is there a legal recourse for that tenant that's been booted out?
Robert, that is interesting. I mean, they can move in anybody under the guise of caretaker, but does there have to be some proof that there is caretaking happening? As she said, there's lights out. There's there has been no prior maintenance. If this doesn't change, do they have a sort of legal recourse?
Correct.
That is a really interesting question. So what the Residential Tenancy Act says is that when a landlord serves one of these notices for landlord use, the tenant who's moving out, if the tenancy ends, they get 1 month of rent as compensation. It also says that if the landlord does not accomplish the stated purpose for ending the tenancy and then follow through on that purpose for at least 6 months, then the tenant may be entitled to 12 months of rent as additional compensation. Now, whether or not I need to actually just to brush up very quickly to remind myself whether this section is worded in such a way. I think it does capture caretaker suites. Just going to very quickly double check
real-time research. Thank you.
Exactly, real-time research. No, yeah, I think it would. I believe it would capture, from my understanding, it would capture that. The question, though, I think the more interesting question, the more complicated question is, would caretaking actually have to happen? The question is the purpose satisfied? And if the purpose is for the caretaker to move in, perhaps a tenant can certainly argue that means that it can't just move in an employee who's going to do something else. They can't move in a bookkeeper or an accountant. It needs to be someone who's doing one of the things listed in the act, one of the roles that a tenant landlord is allowed to evict for. But I will say I've never heard of a case of that specific kind of case going forward. I think any tenant who's considering that kind of claim should certainly get a little information, maybe a little advice, whether it's from TRAC or from another tenant side organization or advocate, because that would be a little bit complicated.
Yeah, so the onus is on us to prove that it's not being done, but then at the same time they could say in 6 months, well, we're still working on it.
Right.
So we're basically kind of, to put it politely, screwed.
But what I'd say is for an individual, the claim is for the individual tenant who is evicted to make. So they're the one who can go to the RTB and say, we want to make a claim for compensation because it hasn't been followed through on. Once the claim is made, the onus is actually on the landlord to prove they have done the thing that they said they're going to do. But of course, it's the tenant who has to bring it forward. It is only a $100 filing fee, or it's to be waived if a person's low income. So it oftentimes makes sense for a tenant to try it, even if they're not totally sure. Okay. But it is an interesting situation, and it's a bit complicated because I haven't really seen one of those caretaker evictions play out in that kind of 12-month rent claim. So certainly if a tenant in a building like that is interested, certainly can reach out to the Tenant Resource and Advisory Center or other. I know the Together Against Poverty Society on the Vancouver Island does a lot of great work in this area as well.
Thanks so much for calling in, Ellen. Great question. And, Robert, I think it's worth exploring too. Are there situations where legitimately a tenant will be evicted that the landlord is well within their rights? Not a loophole, not some of these tricks that we have seen, but where legitimately they are within their rights to evict a tenant.
Oh, I mean, for sure. There are definitely cases where landlords do move in caretakers, right? They do want to move in a live-in caretaker or a property manager. I think there is an interesting question to be had about whether a landlord's right to do that and to move in a caretaker or a property manager is more important than that person's housing and the stability of their housing. That goes to the question of, what kind of evictions in general do we allow? I think so much of the time tenants, where tenant and tenant advocates were fighting in the trenches just to keep people housed with the law based on the rules we have. Sometimes it's important to take a sort of a breath of fresh air and think about, well, why are we allowing people to evict tenants because they want to have a caretaker there? When we're talking about people moving into rental units or moving close family members in, do we want to allow that right that unfettered, especially given how much harm it's causing tenants across the province? 85% of tenants evicted in BC are for these no-fault evictions, for a landlord use eviction of some kind or another. And we are leading the nation in evictions in British Columbia and Vancouver and the Lower Mainland is the absolute epicenter of that. So if the rules we have now that's really prioritize a landlord's right, number one, to receiving their rent and their full profit on time, and number two, to use their unit pretty much as well as they see fit. If that is what's leading to this epidemic, I think we need to look at a rebalance of a tenant's right to housing versus a landlord's right to profit and to do what they want with their property.
Right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's always a hot topic and something I have no doubt we'll be discussing many times in the future, especially in this market. So thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on.
You're welcome. Robert Patterson is a lawyer and tenant advocate at the Tenant Resource and Advisory Centre. You can read more of that report from CBC's Kieran Singh on cbc.ca/cbc.ca/BC. You can also listen to an extended version from Kieran this afternoon on the coast. And are you having trouble making sense of food labels? We'll be joined by a registered dietitian to help explain what you're reading and eating. That's right after the CBC News with Robert Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. The Canadian Armed Forces will be airlifting Canadian citizens and permanent residents out of Israel. Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly says by the end of the week there will be a military aircraft to fly them to Athens. From there, special Air Canada flights will take them home. If you'd like the most recent COVID vaccine this fall, you don't have to wait for an invitation from the province. That was the case last year, but as of yesterday, anyone can book a COVID and flu vaccination appointment at a pharmacy. Walk-in vaccinations are also available at some pharmacies for people aged 5 and up. And a 16-year-old has been released after he was arrested on a BC ferry last night for allegedly setting a fire in one of the washrooms. The RCMP were called just after 8:30 as the vessel docked at Swartz Bay. And now the forecast on the north coast. Sunny this afternoon with a high of 13. Highs to 13 with local smoke and a chance of showers in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, mainly sunny with a high of 14 degrees. Highs up to 17 with a chance of showers in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, including Kelowna, a mix of sun and cloud with a high of 16. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria, and the Fraser Valley, clearing this afternoon with highs around 17. I'll have more local news at the top of the hour. Now back to Amy with BC Today.
Thank you, Robert. Are you a big reader of your food labels?
No.
All right, then.
Not
Maybe
at
you
all.
want to pay attention to our next segment.
What's up with the food labels?
Well, apparently we can learn a lot from them and it'll keep you healthier. So why don't you actually listen?
Yes,
and then go read some food labels.
Actually, I looked at my my granola bar. It had 16 grams of sugar.
Oh.
So I looked at that yesterday because I read something about a lot of sugar in granola bar.
See,
That's a lot
already.
of sugar.
I'm sure we're going to
So I
talk
do.
about that.
All right.
Okay.
Great.
Go enjoy your granola bar.
Okay.
Thank you, Robert.
Bye.
And of course, to you, our audience, welcome back and thanks for joining us on CBC Radio 1, live streaming on CBC Gem, cbc.ca/BC, and on the Vancouver YouTube page. They say you are what you eat, but one look at many food labels and you might struggle to understand or even pronounce exactly what you're feeding yourself or your family. From saturated fats to food dyes, it's a lot to take in. So we're asking, do you read your food labels? Do you base your choices off of them? Or do you wish the labels were maybe easier to understand? Call us at 1-800-825-5950. 604-669-3733, star pound 690 on your cell phone. And you can always email us, CBC or bctoday@cbc.ca. Joining me now is Desiree Nielsen. She is a registered dietitian with a focus on plant-based nutrition and gut health. She's the host of the All Sorts podcast and author of Good for Your Gut. She joins us now and can answer your food and label questions. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thanks for having me, Amy.
This is a big and confusing topic. It's been years since we've had these food labels, but many people don't even know what the label is saying. So, I guess if there's a simple way to explain it, what are you looking at? How do you read a food label?
The label is intended to make whatever's in your food very transparent.
Okay.
So between the ingredients, and of course they are listed from the most to the least, and then the actual micronutrient and macronutrient breakdown. So we're talking about the carbs, the fiber, the fat, even something like iron or calcium. It's meant to make, at a glance, you know what you're eating.
But at a glance, sometimes it can be a bit overwhelming. And, as Robert said, he's just grabbing a granola bar and suddenly he's concerned about how much sugar's in it. Or if you, look at, even just baby food sometimes and you're like, this seems like a lot of ingredients to feed my child. I guess, how is that balanced? Like, how do people sort of know what information they're getting and what it actually means for them?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest black holes for people is that they look at the label and say, okay, I see a number here. I see 6 grams, but I don't know if that's good. Is that what I need? Is that enough? Is that too much? And so one of the most important sort of usefulness factors of the Nutrition Facts panel is to help you compare between foods. So if you're looking at 2 breakfast cereals, you can say, oh, this one has 2 grams of fiber and this one has 10 grams of fiber.
Okay.
Food B looks like it has a lot more, but one of the other tools that they put in place is something called the percent daily value. So for 10 grams of fiber, that's going to look a lot more. That's going to be almost, 30% of your daily value. And that tool is meant to help you say, oh, if it's about 30% of what I need in one serving of cereal, that seems pretty good, as long as you know fiber's a good thing for you.
Right. Well, and is that sort of the bigger cause? It's not what people are reading on the food label, it's that they don't understand what nutrition it is that they actually need. Is that where we need to put a bit more, I guess, thought into?
That really is. And, so many of the things are very non-controversial in the nutritional science. A really great example is fiber.
Okay.
But then when you go online, and I think this is what's really causing the confusion. I just put out a post yesterday about the war on oats.
Yes.
One of the most, beloved staples, a simple single ingredient plant food that's high in fiber. It is the breakfast of like octogenarians everywhere. This should not be a controversial thing, but there are lots of people online saying oats are somehow bad for you, which could not be further from the truth.
And not a word of a lie, I had just bought some oatmeal when I saw your post yesterday. But it's true. You go online and you see, people saying you shouldn't have oats, people saying, certain oils you can't have, certain dyes. And it kind of leads to this culture of fear.
Yeah.
Because it is the unknown. So many people don't exactly understand. So where should we sort of focus that attention? Is it in school? Is it something we need to take on ourselves? Because I'll admit, I am often a bit confused by food labels. Just because I don't have that base of knowledge. Sure, the big ones, fruits and veggies are good, drink enough water, but I don't know all of the specifics.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing that I want to sort of bring across is that for the average person, you don't really need to sweat the small stuff.
Okay.
There are a couple of things people might be interested in. One is sodium. So most of us consume far too much salt, and it's because we eat a lot of like packaged and restaurant foods that are really filled with salt. And so sodium might be one of those things on the label that you say, okay, I want to just keep an eye on it and get the least amount of salt possible. Okay. So if you're saying something has 200 milligrams versus something with 700, you're like, I might make the lower choice here. Yeah.
All right. We've actually got a call. Okay. We'll head out now to Marie in Abbotsford. Marie, there's one thing that you pay a close attention to when you're looking at food labels. What is that?
We look for artificial food dyes, and they come in a form of many different names. One of the ones that's most hidden is tartrazine.
Okay. And How do you feel about that, Desiree?
Yeah. So, depending on your own unique health concerns, food dyes might be something of interest to you. The research is a little bit hit or miss, but tartrazine, for example, and some of the red food dyes, I know that California has just launched this ban on red food dyes.
Exactly.
That's coming down the pipe. And so in Canada, we are supposed to label food dyes of concern, including tartrazine. But I know that that's not necessarily, particularly for smaller food companies, that may not be as widespread as we might like.
Okay. And, oh, sorry, do you have a follow-up question there, Marie?
Yeah, I do. And not necessarily a question, but a thought about food. It's the idea that we have these artificial food colorings in so many things. Even some meats have a red food kind of covering on them to make them look more appetizing. It's exhausting as a mother who has children, especially coming close to the Halloween season, when all of our, even just our fun, simple candies have this horrible food dye that causes my kids emotional outbursts and hives. And yet we sometimes just go to the grocery store for trick-or-treating to buy the safe ones.
Right. And so I would imagine as a parent, do you find this, this time of year specifically challenging, but do you find it a challenge, ever finding the right foods that don't have these dyes or don't have these ingredients? Is it as readily available?
Yes, it's readily available in everything, which is sad. Like your simple chips, even like your healthy drinks. Lemonade often will be laced with a bit of yellow food dye to make it more appealing. It's very fascinating.
Thanks for calling in, Marie. I appreciate it. And Desiree, she had a good point. We're heading into the Halloween season. We just came off a weekend of eating for Thanksgiving. So we're not always as, I guess our nutrition isn't always as top of mind. Is that something people need to, do you need to pay a bit more attention when you're getting Halloween candies? Do you need to sort of monitor what your children are eating for those dyes or for those extra sugars?
I think for most people, I want everyone to just sort of breathe a little sigh of relief, like exhale. Okay. The most important part of nutrition is that on a daily basis, most of the time, so it's what we do day in, day out over months and years that actually move the needle for our health. Okay. So are we putting more fruits and vegetables on the table? Are we trying to eat whole grains more often? Are we trying to include whole foods more often? So, snacking on, like a little handful of almonds at home versus like unwrapping a packaged good, which I know for school, nut-free schools, that's a totally different situation. Yeah. My philosophy is if you are generally well, it is those one-offs like Thanksgiving, like Halloween that don't matter. Okay. And particularly for our children, I'm a mom of two. I have an 8 and a 13-year-old. The relationship that they have with food allergies or intolerances aside, is really paramount for me. Okay. So I really work on food neutrality, the idea that we serve food without labeling anything as good or bad. Right. So we serve broccoli alongside ice cream, and both of those are just food. We can educate on, hey, broccoli has iron, that's really great for your red blood cells, but not that somehow broccoli is better, because it really does impact the way that our children grow up to think of food, and that can change their relationship with their bodies, their relationship with their foods, and ultimately how they make healthy choices.
Well, and that's exactly what I wanted to ask you, because I see it, especially with, online with a lot of influencers. And to me, it seems to be leading to, unhealthy and disordered food choices where they're more focused on the calories or the fat or, getting rid of an entire food group. Do these labels sort of feed into that at all? Or is that just another layer of educating ourselves we need to be aware of?
One of the biggest challenges about providing nutrition information, and that includes the Nutrition Facts panel, like the intent behind that was to make food more transparent. If there are 5 buckets of sugar in a breakfast cereal, Health Canada wants you to know that. But they can be used then, when you have those influencers in the grocery store pointing at that food label saying this is somehow toxic when it's really not. We do sort of lose the forest for the trees a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And what are sort of, I guess, the sort of parameters that the nutrition labels are sort of measured out? Like, is there a, kind of a over under on how much they're or how accurate they are, perhaps? Like, is there a margin of error that people need to keep in mind, or are these fairly, accurate representations of each product?
They are going to be fairly accurate, particularly for like large national brand, very tightly controlled production of things like breakfast cereals, for example. Yeah. Smaller productions, more independent businesses, things where things are made a little bit more by hand may not be as accurate.
Okay, and if something's labeled 0 sugar, could it still have some sugar in it? Or if it's low fat, is it still, is there a certain percentage that it has to fall under?
Yeah, there are cutoffs, for example. So like if it's like less than 0.5 grams of sugar, it can be zero sugar. But then this is where you look at the serving size on a label. Because if I typically eat 6 times that recommended serving size, you are actually getting sugar when you think that something is completely sugar-free.
Right. And is that something that people are quite often surprised about? Is I look sometimes at serving sizes and I say, not today.
Things have improved.
It's a 3-serving day for me,
Things have improved. Like a great example is like a small bag of potato chips where in the past, they would have allowed you to make the serving less than that bag.
Right.
And now they've moved to this sort of quote unquote realistic serving size that if I buy a small bag, I'm going to eat the small bag and you need to know what's in it.
We won't get into eating family-sized bags on your own because that's for a different day. I do want to go to Carol. She's calling from Vancouver. You have a book recommendation, I believe, Carol?
Oh, thank you, Amy. It's called Ultra Processed People.
Okay.
Desiree
is nodding, so I'm assuming she's heard of it.
It's amazing. I have read half of it, I've scanned it, but I have changed my diet totally. I get kosher meat from Masala on Commercial Drive. I have fish a lot. I saw Abraham Hoffer, a very famous man, who was a nutritionist, psychiatrist years ago in Victoria, and he said, "You're Celtic?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Eat a Celtic diet, eat a hunter-gatherer diet, stay away from the dairy, have goat milk if you're going to drink goat milk." And I've tried to follow that, and when I do, I feel really good. I'm cutting the bread and the pasta and the carbs out, and I take Greens Plus and that sort of thing, and I'm a senior. So I just think that it's really important, that ancestral diet.
Well, as long as it's making you feel good and you're getting all the nutrition. Do you read food labels, though, to make sure that you are getting the required nutrients that you need?
I try to.
Okay.
I try to. I'm not always accurate on that, but I try to.
All right. Thank you so much for calling in. And Desiree, you do hear people doing, these specific diets that go with their ancestry or their blood type or where they live. How, as a nutritionist, do you feel, or a dietitian, how do you feel about these paths that people go down?
Yeah, for me, there is a right way of eating for every person. Okay. There are very few absolutes in nutrition. One of them is eat more whole plant foods. That is conserved across every type of dietary pattern you could ever imagine and really, really backed by the research. But beyond that, yes, we need to drink water. We need to eat our fruits and vegetables. Some people may feel better eating more fat than others. Okay. Some people may feel better eating more starchy carbohydrates than others. So like they thrive on bread and pasta, whereas others, they might not be able to control their blood sugar. Okay. For me, the most important thing is that people realize how individualized it is and that they don't say, oh, well, because I don't feel great eating a lot of pasta. Pasta is somehow terrible. Right. No one should eat pasta ever again. And sort of recognize that individuality inherent in nutrition. But for me also, one of the biggest things, because I've read Ultra Processed People. Okay. It's a very well-researched, a very interesting book. And as a dietitian, I would never recommend that people eat exclusively hyper-processed foods because we see that as our sort of the bulk of our calories come from these types of foods because they tend to be higher sugar, higher salt, lower fiber, lower micronutrient. That's not great for us. Right. As long as people sort of don't dip into the other extreme, which is labeling these things as somehow awful, that you should never consume them.
That they're toxic or dangerous.
Exactly. Right. You can absolutely have like a Tootsie Roll at Halloween and you're making sure that you have some fruit at breakfast.
Right, some balance.
Yeah.
We've got Ludolf from Burnaby on the line. He has a quick question for you. Hi, thanks for calling in.
Oh, hi. Sorry. Hi there. I have a question for the guest.
Yeah, go ahead.
I read all the labels all the time, and some of those are very long, so many.
Yes.
So I was told, sometime back that the names in the beginning, they have more quantity. And the ones, as they follow, the amount of quantity goes down. Is that true?
That is true. So on the ingredients label, it is in order of the largest volume or weight of the ingredient all the way down. So for most foods, the first 3 to 5 ingredients are going to comprise the bulk. And some labels you might even see at the end, they'll say contains 2% or less of the following. So you get a really clear indication that there's very little of those ingredients in the food.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does that help you?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Wonderful. Have a good day. We also got an email from Vivian, and she asked, for sulfur dioxide or sulfite preservatives, how harmful are they to one's health? Do they cause a skin rash?
So some people are sulfite sensitive, and that would include, if anyone notices they have a glass of red wine, which are often preserved with sulfites, and they get a little bit of a flush, there can be a histamine reaction from sulfites. Because it is an allergen of concern, we are seeing more and more labeling of sulfite-based ingredients on nutrition facts panels.
Taking a look at the labels once again, are there any changes that you would like to see implemented in food labels? They've obviously, I think it was 2007 that we were, legally mandated to have them on foods. They have evolved, but would you like to see any changes to either simplify them or expand on them?
There is one key difference that I think the last time that these labels were looked at, both in Canada and the US, that I think Canada missed out on, and that is delineating added sugars. The reason for that, there is so much confusion about the concept of sugar. Like most of us instinctively would say all sugar is bad, which is not true.
Because there's natural sugars in so many things.
Exactly. And so in Canada, we chose not to break out the difference between sugars from fruit, for example. So if you have a breakfast cereal that has raisins in it, the sugars in those raisins go under the sugar on the label. And they've created a daily value, which is 100 grams of sugars in total. But not sort of recognizing that added sugars have a very different impact on our body than the naturally occurring sugars in whole foods.
And that's interesting too, because then I would assume, those bran flakes would also be incredibly healthy and beneficial, but you're just focusing on the sugar, so you're not, taking that as a healthy choice. Is there anything, an ingredient on a label that if you see, you're just like, oh, nope, not happening?
For me, because I'm vegan, it's really just any animal products. And, I think it's a great question, because what I see so often in the conversation about nutrition is people hyperfixating on one food or one ingredient. When no one food or no one ingredient, unless you are allergic to that food, will make or break your health. It really is about how that food fits in the context of your diet. So a great example, like healthy eating sometimes look like kale salads, but it also sometimes looks like a piece of cake. Like you don't have to worry about it.
Fair enough. I believe we've got Robin calling in from Vancouver. She just wants a little bit more clarity on the different sugars issues. Robin, hi, how are you?
Hi, Amy. Thank you. Thank you to your guests. I'm fine. My question about sugar, and I'm sorry, I might have missed it while I was speaking to the intake person, but you can't tell the difference on the label between naturally occurring healthy sugars. Like I know sugar is sugar, but it makes a difference whether there's sugar in it because milk contains lactose or there's sugar in it because they dumped it in. And you can't tell the difference. And I wondered if your guest had any suggestions to how to figure that out. Because I'm finding that sometimes I buy a pre-made product, and I'm mostly vegan myself, and it has a sauce in it and tons of sugar, but then it also has peas in it or sweet peppers. And I'm thinking, so how much of that was added and how much was in the healthy ingredients?
It's such a great question. So unfortunately in Canada, just by looking at the nutrition facts panel alone, we don't have that information. So this is where I like to look to the ingredients. So if we're following that ingredients from most to least are in that order in the ingredients panel, then we can look for sugars. So OS, it's typically anything that ends in OSE. So fructose, glucose, sucrose, sugar, maple syrup, honey, corn syrup. So you're starting to look for any of those ingredients. And if they're in the first 3 to 5, then there's a considerable amount added.
Yeah. I hope that clears things up for you, Robin. Is there anything else you wanted to ask, Desiree?
There is that, those percentages, I know people who get confused by the percentages versus the grams. And is there a body size that percentage is based on?
That is a great question. Is it a certain typical full-grown male that they're thinking of, or is there more wiggle room? That is a great question, Robin. Thanks for calling in.
Thank you very much.
It is a great question. So it's really the daily values are based on a theoretical average human.
Okay.
So a great example for that is iron. The daily value used to be 14, which is somewhere between the needs of a non-menstruating adult and a menstruating adult, and they've recently kicked that up to 18. So when you see a daily value, if you aren't menstruating, that's actually way higher based on something that's way higher than what you need.
Okay. And just quickly, sort of last question. Yeah. Are there things that perhaps we don't need to have spelled out that is it sometimes a case of just too much information stopping us from making a proper decision?
I think it is. Okay. I think a little bit of information can be even more dangerous sometimes than a lot of information. So, if people don't have any specific, high blood pressure where they're watching sodium or diabetes where they're watching the sugars. Okay. For the average person, the most important thing for you to ask yourself is, am I eating mostly whole foods? Okay. If you are, the things that come in boxes and bags, you can probably be far less concerned about the nutrition facts than you might have expected.
Okay. And, is it always best, I guess, to, you don't have to read a label if you've made the food yourself. Yes. You know exactly what ingredients are in there. So, is that something that, can help people to sort of, sway more towards home-cooked meals and making snacks and having a little bit more planning so they're not relying on convenience. Yeah. Which I know is very difficult for a lot of busy people.
Yeah, and for myself included. Same. Like I love convenience foods. But it's so true what you just said. Like my question to someone always is it whole most often? Are you cooking most often? Even if it's something very simple, it doesn't have to take you a long time, but home cooking where you choose the ingredients is one of the most powerful steps you can take in taking care of your health.
All right. Yeah. It's all fascinating, and I think I'm going to have to just start trying to read the labels a little bit more and not get so intimidated. Yeah. I'm still always going to be shocked by the serving size, though I can guarantee that. All right. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And sorry, what was your podcast name again, just so people can read more or hear more?
The All Sorts Podcast.
The All Sorts Podcast, yes. So thank you very much. And that was Desiree Nielsen. She is a registered dietitian and author. And remember, we're taking your fall color photos here on the show. You can email them to us, bctoday@cbc.ca, and we'll show them at the end of the program. So you could also win a BC Today prize pack. We're loving these photos that you've sent in that we're showing you right now. Gary Schneider's pictures from a hike in the Purcells near Invermere. Aaron Kindrade caught a great blue heron on camera while paddling at Dead Man's Island on Lekwungen territory. Eva Trinjik got her camera out on the Coquihalla, and Valerie Coles took a close-up of a brilliant red maple leaf in North Van. Thank you all so much. Our email is bctoday@cbc.ca. Thank you to everyone that listened and watched. Michelle Eliot will be back with you for tomorrow. And again, thank you for listening. I'm Amy Bell, and I'll talk to you soon.